of the things that MKUltra was involved in was dosing unwitting people with LSD to see how they would react. Again, because if the Soviets, let's say, were to dose a city with LSD, we want to know how to defend against that and how to deal with people who have been surreptitiously dosed with this drug. So MKUltra personnel like Sidney Gottlieb, the head of the program, he would dose unwitting people with LSD to monitor their behaviors to determine what kind of effects this would have on them. This, in several cases, led to tragic consequences. The most famous person whom this happened to was Frank Olson, who was dosed with LSD at a retreat with Sidney Gottlieb, and he ended up kind of having a psychotic break. His wife didn't understand like what his mind state was after that, and a few days later he jumps out of a hotel window and dies.
So are you of the opinion that he did jump out of that window? Because there is some dispute, including from the family, who had his body exhumed, and further analysis indicated he may have had blunt force trauma before he ended up out of the window. And, you know, at the time, he wasn't just some random unwitting subject. He was one of them and knew a lot of, you know, the secrets of what they were doing, all these, you know, sensitive national security information. So I know there's long been skepticism about the, you know, the events surrounding his death.
Yes, there has been. In fact, Frank Olson's own son, Eric Olson, is one of the main proponents of the idea that his father was murdered by the CIA, potentially because Frank Olson was involved in what was called the airborne distribution of pathogens. How is it possible to create weapons that we can use, you know, anthrax or germ bombs, and how is that going to spread in the air? That's what Frank Olson was working on. And so Eric Olson and some others who were of the opinion that he was murdered think that maybe Frank Olson started to have moral compunctions about what he was doing, and maybe he was going to expose it, and so the CIA had to get him out of the way, and so they threw him out of this hotel window. I don't think that's the case. In fact, you know, you mentioned that they had his body exhumed and analyzed to determine whether there was this blunt force trauma. David Starrs led that process, and he did determine that he thought there might have been some blunt force trauma before Frank Olson went out the window. However, there were several people on Starrs' team who negated that conclusion and said that Starrs was someone who kind of sought the spotlight and made things a little bit more sensational than we would have, and so we don't think that's the case. In fact, they said they thought it was consistent with his head hitting the window on the way out. So I'm pretty skeptical of the idea that Frank Olson was murdered. There are several other people who were victims of MKUltra who had very similar symptoms to him. They've been dosed unwittingly with LSD, and they ended up in psychiatric institutions for the rest of their life. So I think it's more likely that he had that same kind of psychotic break that several other people who were victims of this did as well.
So what was your motivation to write the book now? I know there were newly discovered documents, depositions that really got to the heart of some of the inner thinkings of people like Sidney Gottlieb. So talk about a little bit of what's new and what you were able to uncover here.
Yeah, thank you. Because that's the really exciting part of this book, is the fact that the basis for it is these depositions I found as part of a lawsuit in the 1980s. There were several victims of MKUltra who sued the CIA. That lawsuit was eventually settled out of court, but as part of the lawsuit, the lawyers representing the plaintiffs, Joseph Rao, James Turner, famous civil rights attorneys, they took the depositions of dozens of people who were involved in this case, dozens of the perpetrators like Sidney Gottlieb, Robert Lashbrook, Richard Helms, the head of the CIA eventually, and they took several depositions of the victims of MKUltra. Since this lawsuit was settled out of court, the depositions just kind of stayed in the papers of Joseph Rao until he passed away, and those were donated to the Library of Congress. And I was rooting around in there, and I happened to find these depositions, thousands of pages of verbatim transcript of him asking the perpetrators and victims of MKUltra what they did, what they went through. So it's so exciting for a historian because I can actually use dialogue now, because I have dialogue between these attorneys and these deponents. Usually in fiction, you get to invent dialogue. In history, you don't invent dialogue, and so you can't really have that exciting part of getting into the heads of the characters as well. But now with these depositions, that's exactly what I have. So that was one of the main catalysts for wanting to write this book. I had so many great verbatim transcripts, thousands of pages. In fact, Sidney Gottlieb's transcripts of his depositions run to over 800 pages alone. So I have 800 pages of him talking about exactly what he did.
What do you think is the cultural legacy of MKUltra? And I mean, I just was thinking about, I know this is something you've thought about as well. There's a lot of wild conspiracy theories out there at this particular time. I think this happens anytime there's sort of a breakdown in institutional trust. But also when you look back at our own history and you look at the government doing things like this, it's like, oh, well, I mean, you can't put anything past them. They'll do wild, mind control experiments to try to create assassin animals and, and try to mind control random unwitting subjects, prostitutes dosing their clients and even some of their own, specialists getting unwittingly dosed, et cetera. So it's hard to put anything past them when you have such an incredibly wild and proven conspiracy that is lurking in the background.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's such a good point because MK Ultra really opens the door for a lot of conspiracy theorists to latch onto it for a few reasons and to say, oh, well, if the CIA was doing something so crazy in the past and so patently unethical. In fact, the CIA's own Inspector General in 1963 said that this was illegal and unethical. So that's coming from the CIA itself.
Right.
So the fact that the CIA did something like that, it leads the conspiracy theorists to say, if they did that, what else must they be doing today? And there are a few reasons why MK Ultra in particular is suited towards this kind of conspiratorial thinking. One reason, like you just mentioned, is because it is just so absurd that it opens the door for any possibilities. The other is because in 1973, Sidney Gottlieb, the head of this program, he retired from the CIA, as well as Richard Helms, the director of Central Intelligence, and they decided when they retired to destroy the MK Ultra files. At least most of them. They didn't get all of them. There were thousands of pages that still survived. But the act of that destruction, the fact that they incinerated these files, really opened a Pandora's box because now anyone can say, well, we can't know exactly what MK Ultra was in total because we don't have those files. Therefore, maybe they were doing this or maybe they were doing that. The fact that we don't have those files really opens the Pandora box for anyone filling in the record with their wildest imagination. And that has led a lot of conspiracy theorists to argue that, well, maybe MK Ultra was involved in trafficking children, or maybe it was controlling celebrities like Britney Spears. Now that the Pandora's box is open because those files are destroyed, anyone can say anything about the program. However, I don't think that's a great mode of argument because it's kind of ironic, but we almost know more about MK Ultra than almost any other secret project. It seems counterintuitive because a lot of these files were destroyed, but we have so many files and sources on MK Ultra. We have thousands that actually survived. We have the memoirs and interviews of people who were involved in this. We have thousands of pages of depositions that I found. We have institutional records that have been released since. We have government reports. We have the Rockefeller Commission, Church Committee, Pike Committees, these congressional and executive committees that were set up in 1974 and 5 to investigate these past abuses. So we have so much material about MK Ultra. I actually think that we can know a good deal of what it was. And even better, we can know so much about it that we can know what it wasn't. And it wasn't something that trafficked in child sex slaves or whatever the conspiracy theorists are saying.
All right, John, tell people where they can find the book.
You can find it in bookstores wherever, hopefully
all the places.
At any good bookstore, it'll be there. You can find it online. And I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.